modern world was extremely optimistic. People saw these changes as positive. They welcomed innovation and championed progress. Change became a signifier of progress and modernity. Stasis signaled outmoded, old-fashioned, conservative, and was to be avoided by the new modern public. Modern Europe and the US internalized these positions and used modernity as a way of determining and validating their superiority vis-a-vis the non-West. The 19th century was also a period of tremendous colonial growth and expansion in the name of progress and social benefit. These ideas and changes, which made modern societies look, act, and think so differently from traditional cultures, also encouraged the belief that the modern world could find universal answers and that everyone would agree to them. This is going to be especially important for modern artists who are sure they can find a universal approach to art and art making that will work for everyone. By the 19th century, art exhibitions were well established. Throughout Europe, there was a growing art audience and buying market for pictures of all kinds, from large history paintings, which were most suited for public buildings and state expenditures, to portraits, landscapes, still life, sporting scenes, and genre paintings. Additionally, the print market expanded to enormous proportions, with buyers for prints of old masters as well as contemporary works, caricature, and comic art. During the 19th century, dominance of the art market gradually shifted from state purchases and those made by landed families to a larger, more anonymous market of bourgeois or middle-class buyers. Throughout most of the 19th century, the fine art world was still dominated by academies, where artists were trained and where the largest art exhibitions were mounted. The Royal Academy in London and the Académie des Beaux-Arts in Paris were the most famous and influential. Americans tried, but never succeeded in establishing a national academy that influenced art as strongly as European academies. American resistance to official cultural control, their often ambivalent attitude, or even suspicion towards fine art, and a difficulty in defining a particular style as American were some reasons for not being able to establish an official arbiter of taste. The Academy system guaranteed tremendous artistic exposure to artists who were both members and visiting exhibitors, since the annual juried shows required large numbers of works in order to draw big crowds. There were drawbacks to such a system, however, and artists increasingly chafed under them. It was difficult to get good training outside of an academy. Membership in the academy guaranteed higher prices and more prestige, as well as better hanging space at the annual shows. Academies also agreed on a specific hierarchy of painting subjects that was headed by history paintings, which were based on classical literature, biblical and mythological subjects, and important contemporary historical or cultural issues. The Raft of the Medusa was a history painting, which was why the artist could paint it on such a large scale and expect to sell it to the state. Academic artists believed that the best way to paint about human virtue, endeavor, or emotions meant developing those ideas through classical associations, even though the contemporary European world was becoming more industrial and modern. This tension between established notions about art and picturing and contemporary life remained a central issue of modern art. In order of importance, the next categories were portraiture. These were expensive and could range from head and shoulders to full-length life-size paintings. Genre, scenes of everyday life. Immense variety of subject matter, these tended to be small. After all, the buyers were the wealthy, and few people wanted large pictures of the working classes. Landscape. These could be of actual places like the Constable you see here, or highly romanticized with imaginary buildings. Still life, the lowest category. And this could include food, flowers, and objects. The English liked still life with dead game. Many younger artists closely identified with modernity and embraced the new techniques and innovations, the spirit of progress, invention, discovery, creativity, and change. They wanted to participate in creating the modern world, and they were anxious to try out new ideas rather than following the more conservative guidelines of the Academy. These artists became known as the avant-garde. It's a military term for the soldier who takes the lead, what we would call today the point man. It's a bit of a dangerous position, but armies and art can't progress without it. Avant-garde artists were looking increasingly to the private sector for patronage, tapping into that growing group of bourgeois with money to spend and houses to fill with paintings. This new middle-class audience was replete with commercial cash, disposable income, and they wanted pictures that they could understand, that were easy to look at, fit into their homes, address subjects they liked. Not for them the historical cycles of gods, saints, and heroes with their complex intellectual associations and references. Instead, they wanted landscapes, genre scenes, and still life. They were not less educated than earlier buyers, but educated with a different focus and set of priorities. Reality was here and now. Progress was inevitable, and the new hero of modern life was the modern man. Modernity is then a composite of contexts, a time, a space, and an attitude. What makes a place or an object modern depends on these associations. Throughout the 19th century, there were artists who produced contemporary pictures that we do not label modern art, generally because the techniques or subjects were associated with the conservative Academy approaches, and these pictures and sculptures are often termed academic in order to distinguish them from that which is being defined as modern. That was a lot of information, but it's important to know what people valued about art and why institutions like academies were so powerful. We live in a world of rapid change with lots of different kinds of art happening at the same time. So it may be hard at first to understand why most people living in a modern country in the 19th century were still so resistant to modern art. What made it so different? Why were concerns like obvious brushstrokes or skewed perspectives so threatening? Why couldn't there be different definitions of good art? To answer those questions, we need to look at the first modern movement, realism. We're going to be looking at some of the ways that early realist painters challenged the Academy conventions for fine art. In particular, I'll talk about Gustave Courbet, who wrote the first manifesto about modern art. Courbet's ideas about what modern painters should and shouldn't do dramatically influenced artists who were interested in new subjects and new approaches to art. Let's begin by looking at the relationship between reality and modernity.